Congress just blocked Trump's war powers, and 60% of Americans are against this war. But what did Trump do at his press conference? He showed off his swimming pool. Watch this and decide for yourself.
On this vote, the yeas are 215 and the nays are 208. The concurrent resolution is adopted.
Breaking news late today, that is the House voting to rein in the Iran war. It is a huge rejection of Donald Trump's effort to keep this off the floor, and it took a break for Republicans breaking with Trump and joining Democrats to push this resolution just over the edge. This is one of those nail biters. Now, there's a long road from here to ending the war, but it shows you just how the opposition around the country is rising, and the war would be stopped if the entire Senate and Congress move forward on this with enough votes to trigger the full War Powers Act. So we're not there yet, but tonight we are watching a major rejection of Trump that included 4 Republicans and, as you see, many of the Democrats in the House. I'm joined by Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation, of course, president of the National Action Network. Reverend Sharpton, this is a big rebuke of Trump's Iran war at a time when the country has clearly turned against it. What does a vote like this mean tonight?
Vote means that you now have a break in the dam, in the Trump dam, that it doesn't mean that you're going to get a flood, but it means you at least have a leak. And I think that this leak should be troubling to Trump, because as we now go from primary season almost over to the general elections, a lot of Republicans, after seeing these 4 in the House, are going to have to rethink how do they stand with this Iran situation, with gas prices still up and food and groceries still up. And we don't even see an end to the Strait of Hormuz being open. So this gives a lot of people things to think about. I don't think it's a slam dunk, but it starts the whole ballgame.
Yeah, and you rarely see this kind of War Powers Act resistance in Congress happen this fast.
Right.
Trump had famously promised a quick end to the war, a very hard to predict war. He was wrong. We know why he was saying that, because he knew already he was doing something risky and unpopular. So we've passed his timeline, busted through it. The public is very clear on this. I'll show the poll and remind everyone this is much worse than the first week of the war. Now, 60% of Americans oppose the Iran war. A tiny slice, 28% supporting. You do the math on that, Rev, translation, a heck of a lot of Republican voters, people who voted for Trump at least once, are against this thing, which means that this is a midterm issue that the party has to worry about.
The party must worry about it. It is a midterm issue. When you see his in Iowa, the handwriting is on the wall that they at least need to stop and look at what they're doing if they're not outright concerned. And clearly, with the president going back and forward with the $1.8 billion slush fund and this, that, and other, none of this is helping them. But the war at a centerpiece of this, because this is hitting people where they live. You can talk all of the ideology you want. You can talk all the politics you want. When a person pulls up to the gas station and it's $4.50 to $6 a gallon, that is not politics to him. That's real life. And that the president can't explain and has not explained.
And the wider narrative has really shifted. You know, forever we heard Republicans will stand with him on everything. They won't break. This doesn't move them. That doesn't move them. What'll move? That was we heard that endlessly. And there was a period of time when it felt like that. And now, you know, you really stitched together. You had pushback on tariffs. You had them overriding him with a veto-proof majority on Epstein. You have a lot of concern about the way he's picking candidates in the midterm. So the Senate Republicans were mad at what he did down in Texas.
Nature of that press conference. I did want to point out something, which is that even with all of that happening, and even with the blow that Trump took from Congress today from his own Republican Party on the Iran war, Trump did have something he really did want to talk about today, and it was this.
Look at what's happening here. America is heading toward a possible war. Congress just voted to limit Trump's power. 60% of Americans oppose this conflict. And Trump shows up to talk about his swimming pool. This isn't just a distraction, folks. This is a signal that there is no clear plan in place. When leaders have no answer, they redirect your attention. And that right there is the most dangerous thing of all.
Well, these are, they just had this done. You're getting a first glimpse.
A first glimpse. So what is he talking about? Let me just show you. It's a poster of the reflecting pool. And you can see on a nice big fancy poster board, comparing it to skyscrapers, the Empire State Building, One World Trade, and what was known as the Sears Tower in Chicago. That is what he wanted to present today. Kristen Holmes is out front live outside the White House. And Kristen, I know you're learning new information tonight about how some inside Trump world are viewing this rebuke from the House tonight, where Trump failed on the Iran war in terms of what he wanted from his own party.
Yeah, Aaron, I mean, when I'm talking to these various White House officials and Trump allies, there is a huge amount of concern that this is just the beginning of the pushback from the Republican Party. When you look at that vote, you see 4 Republicans voting with Democrats. Can you imagine a time 6 months ago when you would see 4 Republicans siding with Democrats? No, you can't, because you see the frustration that is mounting within the Republican Party, and they're getting more and more pushback. And the other thing to keep in mind here is when we've been talking to the Trump administration, to various officials, they always believed that if, in fact, Democrats were going to win in November, everything would be grinded to a halt. So they were going to try to squeeze in as much legislation as they possibly could before January, before that new Congress is sworn in. But now you're starting to see pushback on all of these various things, all part of Trump's agenda from his own party. And that's where the real concern is. Can they even govern now when he controls both the House and the Senate? And as you noted, this isn't happening in a vacuum. It's not just about Iran, although I will tell you from the sources I talked to, they are so angry about this war. They are so angry that it is not over. Even people who supported him, voted for him, who still stand by him publicly, have told me they can't believe this is still happening. They feel like it was a self-inflicted wound. But as I said, it's not a vacuum. We also saw what happened with that $1.8 million fund, the weaponization fund. This idea that Republicans were livid about this, pushing back. Again, not something you would have seen 6 or 8 months ago. So
today, the House did something it's refused to do for 4 months. It voted to tell the president that this war in Iran has gone on long enough without the consent of the American people. We passed a war powers resolution by a vote of 215 to 208, directing the withdrawal of U.S. forces from hostilities against Iran unless and until Congress authorizes them. Let me be clear about what that means, because it really does matter. The Constitution is not ambiguous on this. Article 1 gives Congress, not the president, the power to declare war. The framers did that on purpose. They just fought a revolution against a king who could send a nation to war on his own say-so, and they decided that the most serious thing that a country can do, asking its sons and daughters to go to war, should require the agreement of the people's representatives. For 4 months, this administration has waged a war it never asked us to approve. American service members have already lost their lives. We've been given no clear plan for how this all ends. When a president can do all this alone, the war power belongs to one man. That's exactly what the founders feared. Look, I want to be honest with you about what today is and is not. This resolution still has to pass the Senate. The president can veto it. Overriding that veto takes 2/3 of both chambers, and we're certainly not there yet. But importantly, for the first time, a majority of the People's House has gone on record. Members of both parties looked at this war and said the Constitution still means something. That is not nothing. That is the system that our founders built, finally beginning to work the way that it was meant to. Look, this is about whether we still believe that going to war is a decision that the whole nation should make together. And today, the House finally said yes. Now the fight moves to the Senate, and I'm going to keep pushing until Congress reclaims the authority that the Constitution
New
gave.
news just happened moments ago. The House has passed a resolution limiting President Trump's war powers in Iran. Nicole Killian has the latest from Capitol Hill. And Nicole, what happened?
Yeah, well, this is a pretty significant development, Major, because as you know, both the House and Senate have at various times tried to push these war powers resolutions unsuccessfully. But today, for the first time, the House was successful in advancing this resolution to, in effect, block the president from ordering further strikes against Iran. Now, granted, this is just a resolution. It would still have to come over to the Senate, but it does show, given that there was bipartisan support for this resolution, this growing unrest and skepticism on the part of many lawmakers about the war. Of course, from the outset, many Democrats have argued that congressional authorization should be required in instances of declaring war. And we just had Secretary Rubio here on Capitol Hill earlier today, in effect saying that the war had ended, that Operation Epic Fury had concluded. But many Democratic lawmakers challenged him on that, noting that there are still these strikes that are occurring. Rubio pushed back, saying those are defensive strikes, that these are just hostilities. But again, there continues to be this ongoing tension between Capitol Hill and the White House over the endgame for this war. This is really the first opportunity we've seen in terms of lawmakers trying to force the administration's hand here.
And Nicole, forgive me, I know this just happened, but any sense of what the final tally was or how many Republicans crossed over?
Yeah, I believe the vote tally was 215 to 208. I've got to pull it up. But again, we know, I believe it was four Republicans rather, who voted in favor of this. I'll have to pull this up at a later time to try to confirm. 215 to 208. No, that's correct. So again, this will now head over to the Senate. And the Senate did clear a similar measure not too long ago, just on a procedural vote, where we also saw some Republicans cross over to vote with Democrats. So again, even though Republicans have been supportive of the president's efforts and have tried to give the administration some runway here with respect to the ongoing conflict around, obviously, patience is wearing thin in both parties. And again, this vote today is a sign of that.
Nimble and accurate as always, Nicole Killian, pulling up the data as I ask you for it. Thank you very much for that. Let's talk about what Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina Republican, has tried to put on the table to preserve some mechanism of compensating Americans who believe they were somehow victims of Justice Department weaponization during the Biden administration.
I think what we're watching here is something deeper than a disagreement over policy. I do. What we're seeing is a president who assumed that power alone would be enough to carry public opinion, enough to silence critics, enough to keep Congress in line. And look, it isn't working. Because from the very beginning, this conflict lacked the one thing major military actions usually require: public legitimacy. Right? Trump didn't build a consensus. He didn't make the case. He didn't seek broad congressional approval. He acted first and expected everyone else to fall into place afterward. And now he's discovering that even members of his own party have limits. That's why the anger feels so personal. That's why the rhetoric keeps escalating. When leaders lose control of the narrative, they often try to control the people instead. And I think that's what has so many Americans concerned right now, not just Democrats either. Independents, even Republicans who may have supported Trump in the past but don't want to hand over Congress's constitutional authority. We've seen moments like this before. Think about the aftermath of the Dobbs decision in 2022. Political insiders expected one outcome, but voter anger changed the entire conversation. It energized people who felt ignored. It mobilized voters who believed the system was being manipulated. And Democratic voters today are carrying that same intensity into this fight. Because at the end of the day, this isn't only about one conflict. It's about accountability. It's about whether institutions still matter. It's about whether elected officials answer to voters or to one man demanding loyalty. And the more Trump pushes, the more resistance he creates. And that's why Trump keeps losing the political battle.